Star Trek. That moderately successful 56-year-old TV series that would go on to be a $6 billion franchise. By now, you've probably heard how a grassroots letter-writing campaign saved Star Trek from cancellation on NBC TV in 1968. But what if I told you that halfway into the production of Season 1, something else saved Star Trek? Well, sort of. That something was aluminum model toys, also known as AMT, one of the biggest producers of plastic scale model kits at the time. They were rushing to produce kits of the Enterprise, but they wanted to license a second design from the show. But the way they went about securing that license would actually lead to the company's direct involvement in the production of the series, thus saving a now iconic episode from being tossed into the trash, to say nothing of the creation of a key Star Trek concept we take for granted today. Yes, it's the Galileo shuttlecraft. So cue the generic royalty-free music, because we're about to explore the surprising reason why the shuttlecraft was designed in the first place, and how there probably wouldn't even be one if AMT hadn't wanted a license to produce another Star Trek model kit. My name is Tim, you're watching Scale Icons, and this is the story of how AMT saved Star Trek. Sort of. Star Trek's USS Enterprise was designed by Walter Matt Jeffries, an illustrator with a background as an aviation and mechanical designer who tried to bring as much logic and real-world functionality to his design as the budget would allow. It's a fascinating story, and one that I covered in depth in this video. There's a link in the description below if you haven't caught it yet. One of the unique features of its design was the set of large clamshell doors at the aft end of the secondary hull. This was always intended to be the ship's hangar deck, and the early part of Season 1 certainly featured talk about the shuttles on board.
This is the observation deck, that's the flight deck down there, with the shuttlecraft.
But in the even earlier first season episode called The Enemy Within, Sulu and his landing party are stranded on a frozen planet after the transporter malfunctioned. Now, I always remember watching this episode in syndication as a kid in the 1970s, and wondering why a shuttlecraft just didn't fly down to pick them up.
Do you think you might be able to find a long rope somewhere and lower us down a pot of hot coffee?
Well, the truth is that even though the Enterprise sported those big hangar bay doors, there was no actual hangar deck or shuttlecraft on the inside, because they hadn't been designed yet. While still developing concepts for the series, Jeffries pitched an idea for a small, aerodynamic craft that could be light enough to be lowered from the studio ceiling on wires to simulate a landing. Desilu Studios, the studio producing Star Trek, gave this a big thumbs down, as this ambitious concept would be far too costly. Budget restrictions usually make it very hard to create convincing sci-fi stories, especially in the mid-1960s.
No Bucks, no Buck Rogers.
But Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry knew that there had to be a way to get the characters off the ship, otherwise things would get boring pretty quickly. So he came up with the transporters as an inexpensive alternative to shuttles, leaving poor Sulu and his landing party to almost freeze to death while trying to keep warm under a shower curtain. However, midway through Season 1, the Enterprise finally got its shuttlecraft and a place to put them. But first, if you like videos about science fiction scale models, and who doesn't, all the things that inspire designers to dream them up, manufacturers to produce them, and hobbyists of all ages to build them, then remember to subscribe to this channel and click that notification bell icon so you don't miss a single video. So, early in Star Trek's pre-production, Desilu Studios and AMT negotiated terms for a model kit of the USS Enterprise, and according to the contract, an undefined second model as well. Depending on who you talk to, some say this second model was going to be the Klingon D-7 battlecruiser. But in his book Beyond the Clouds, author Richard Jeffries, and brother of Matt Jeffries, claimed that the second model was always intended to be the Galileo shuttlecraft. Actually, the deal between AMT and Desilu would end up being more than the purchase of a license to make model kits. As a matter of fact, AMT agreed to take on a significant role in the production that might surprise you. This memo from Edwin Perlstein, Desilu's Director of Business Affairs, dated August 2nd, 1966, informed producer Robert Justman that not only had the licensing deal been finalized, but AMT had agreed to pick up the costs of constructing the full-size shuttlecraft mock-up, as well as the miniature of the shuttle for use in visual effects shots. Not only that, AMT agreed to build the interior set of the shuttlecraft for the actors as well. Every good producer is always on the lookout to save production costs, and Justman was no different. Quote, "All it costs us was the expense to truck it from Arizona to the set in Los Angeles. And just in time, the production costs for the upcoming episode called The Galileo 7 had been, quote, spiraling out of control." So this deal probably saved both the classic episode and its introduction of the iconic shuttlecraft from the trash can. As Justman noted, the deal was accomplished at a time when everyone thought all was lost. This degree of participation by a licensee was almost unheard of at the time. They'd also pay royalties of 5% for all shuttlecraft models sold, plus make a $3,000 advance on sales of Enterprise model kits. AMT was pretty confident their investment would yield big profits for them.
Doing licensing.
They are also betting big. AMT estimated construction costs for the mock-up at about $24,000. Adjusted for inflation, that works out to about $225,000 today. Although the Star Trek production team led by Jeffries would design the shuttlecraft, AMT assigned its subsidiary, the Speed and Custom Shop, headed by Gene Winfield, to build both the full-size props and the filming miniature. Before the ink had even dried, Jeffries got to work on the concept. He came up with a sleek aerodynamic design that would reduce friction and drag during an atmospheric re-entry. This rounded teardrop shape carried over design elements from the Enterprise, much like the initial shuttles of the later spin-off series, Star Trek The Next Generation did. Unfortunately, he became the first, but not the last, Star Trek art director to learn that compound curves were pretty much taboo in the context of TV budgets and schedules. When you're limited to sheets of plywood, curves are the first thing to go. With only 30 days to build this complete unit and deliver it to the set, it's not surprising at all that Gene Winfield said Jeffries' design couldn't be built, at least in the short period of time that they had. But first, can we just take a minute to appreciate the elegant beauty of Jeffries' initial design, as rendered by artist Vance Bergstrom? I'm hoping this iteration of the shuttlecraft appears in some future version of Star Trek. Anyway, Jeffries told Winfield to go ahead and redesign the shuttlecraft. If he liked what Winfield came back with, he'd give him the green light for construction. Winfield, who at that time was a noted custom car builder with plenty of experience in Hollywood, turned to Thomas Kellogg of the design firm Raymond Loewy and Associates for help. Kellogg had been part of the design studio's team that produced the 1963 Avanti for the Studebaker Corporation. So it's not surprising that many of that car's graceful lines found their way into the redesign of the shuttlecraft. The result was a sleek, elegant design that incorporated Jeffries' aerodynamic principles while still maintaining a flat-sided layout that could be built in the necessary 30-day window. In hindsight, it looks like Kellogg may have been inspired by Jeffries' 1964 sketch of the Space Dock Utility Craft personnel carrier, which featured twin warp nacelles. Although absent from Kellogg's design, these nacelles would later be added during the construction phase. After reviewing Kellogg's color rendering, Jeffries gave his blessing to Winfield, and construction of the full-size ship commenced. The full-size shuttlecraft was essentially a metal skeleton covered in plywood, masonite, and fiberglass cloth. Those warp nacelles were actually 18-inch diameter steel casings made for oil wells, and were removable for transport or storage. And the curved fins along the upper edges of the hull were made from sheet metal. Once completed, the shuttlecraft mock-up measured about 22 feet long by 5.5 feet tall. But don't let your eyes fool you. The mock-up was constructed at 3/4 scale, a common practice in those days to save money. Not only that, the smaller size meant there was no interior details of any kind. Because of this, the interior was built as a separate set by AMT. So just like Doctor Who's TARDIS, The interior was bigger than the exterior. This also meant that with a higher ceiling, the actors could stand upright without crouching. Oh, and those 2 rectangular openings on the lower front of the shuttlecraft? They're not vents. Despite being rendered like that in pretty much every blueprint, toy, or model of the shuttlecraft you've ever seen, as well as on screen in the remastered version of Star Trek. On the full-size mock-up, they were nothing more than open holes. But in an interview in 2020, Gene Winfield admitted that these holes were actually intended to be the shuttlecraft's landing lights, and that the openings were going to be covered by a pane of glass to make the lights look more aerodynamic. Unfortunately, neither this feature nor the planned lighting effects for the nacelle domes were ever completed due to budgetary reasons. At the same time the full-scale mock-up was coming together, a team of 3 artisans at Winfield's shop were working on the 22-inch long effects miniature. Built mostly out of plastic and wood, with a few metallic features, the model was designed to be filmed either suspended from wires or mounted on a post. The model also had internal lighting for its impulse deck and its front windows. There was a lot of concurrent activity during those frantic 30 days. Not only were the full-size and miniature Galileo being built, but Desilu veteran artist Richard Dayton was also assembling the Shuttle Bay miniature. Dayton, you'll remember, built the filming model of the Enterprise herself. Yet, the Shuttle Bay miniature was anything but, as it was built in scale with the 22-inch long shuttlecraft model. Dayton also produced decal sheets with markings for both the Galileo and the Columbus, but only the Galileo markings were ever applied to the model. Once built, the miniature was shipped to Linwood G. Dunn's Film Effects of Hollywood, where footage was shot of both the Galileo flying through space and inside the Shuttle Bay miniature. After a breakneck 30 days of production, AMT delivered on everything they'd promised, and as a result, we got the iconic episode, the Galileo 7. Years later, Jeffrey said he harbored some regret over the final design of the shuttlecraft. Overall, I was a little disappointed, but I think within their capabilities it was a good solution. And it did work, obviously. People did accept it. The 22-inch miniature vanished after the series ended and was presumed to be lost, stolen, or destroyed during a cleanup at Paramount in 1973. But in 1987, the model unexpectedly reappeared when Star Trek The Next Generation set decorator, John Dwyer, found the old miniature in storage at Paramount. The model was refurbished and found itself in use as background decoration in several episodes. As for the full-size mock-up, it too disappeared for decades until it re-emerged in 2012, but in horrible condition. After being restored, it found its way to the Houston Space Center, then the Intrepid Air and Space Museum. It's now found a permanent home at the Star Trek Original Series set tour in Ticonderoga, New York, where it's currently in storage while an appropriate display area is constructed for it. The original Enterprise model kit was distributed to hobby and toy stores in early 1967 and was a massive hit for AMT. Yet, despite their infusion of cash and talent into the production of Season 1 just to secure rights to release a shuttlecraft model kit, AMT wouldn't release the Galileo 7 kit until 1974, 5 years after the series was cancelled. Producer Robert Justman was probably right when he said in that 1967 memo that, "My personal feeling is that pretty soon AMT will be sorry they did not undertake the Galileo model kit." There doesn't seem to be any record documenting AMT's reason for delaying the release of the kit. It's a mystery, and if you happen to know the reason, comment below. But when it was finally released, the Galileo kit was underwhelming. Coming in at roughly 1/36 scale, or 1/35, or even 1/50 depending on who you ask, the kit bore only a superficial resemblance to either the filming miniature or the full-size mock-up. The kit featured less than 30 parts, including some for the interior cabin. The door didn't open and the front windows were molded with the shutters closed, which might make you wonder why an interior was even included. Well, that's because the top half of the shuttlecraft could be lifted off to reveal a very simplified interior. And I mean simplified. 7 chairs and a dashboard that looked like it came from a car model. Sure, it retained the basic layout of the interior set, but it was missing many of the unique interior details. including the rear compartment, even though a bulkhead was included. The kit came with a simple sheet of decals, but they were also problematic. The fonts were inaccurate, and the impulse engines were represented by a series of black shapes that only vaguely resembled the same feature on the real design. When completed, the kit measured about 8 inches in length. Thanks to all of these shortcomings, as well as the overall toy-like quality of the kit, builders came to refer to it as the Flying Butter Dish. But hey, at least you could order a Star Trek jacket with your proof of purchase. That's gotta count for something. During its lifetime, the kit went through 3 production runs. The original release in 1974, a repacking into a different box format in 1975, and the final release in 1991 by AMT URL. This latter kit included new box art, branding for Star Trek's 25th anniversary, a retooled set of front windows you could actually see through this time, and a slightly more extensive decal sheet that included markings for both the Galileo and the Columbus. Because of the kit's notorious shortcomings, modelers have gone to astounding lengths to convert the kit into something that more closely resembled the on-screen shuttlecraft. Other than AMT's offering, several resin Galileo kits have been sold by third-party manufacturers over the years, including a 1/35th scale kit from Resin Ranger in 2000, and a 1/24th scale kit from Randy Cooper Models in 2016. In 2020, Round 2 Models surprised the industry with their release of a completely new 1/32nd scale shuttlecraft under their Polar Lights brand. This wasn't just an update of the old AMT kit, it was a completely new and accurate tooling that reproduced the sleek lines of the original design first seen on TV screens almost 5 decades earlier. Long in development, Round 2's Jamie Hood said that the company tackled the new kit because of consumer demand. Likely because the primary appeal is that it comes from the original series and it has never been kitted accurately. Although Round 2's 2020 release was the most accurate licensed shuttlecraft kit yet, it was notable for lacking one very significant feature: an interior. All the more surprising because the empty cabin was clearly visible through the large front windows. Round 2 ultimately decided to forego this feature with this initial release, due to concerns about how it might inflate the eventual price point. From a practical perspective, there was also a consideration that the TV show's interior set didn't really match up with the dimensions of the exterior. Remember, the full-sized mock-up was built at 3/4 scale. This is why the interior scenes showed plenty of headroom. But the actors had to crouch when exiting the shuttlecraft. Gary Kerr, a well-known Star Trek technical consultant, worked overtime for Round 2 to design an interior. It had to not only accurately represent the full-sized set, it also had to fit inside the shuttlecraft kit without violating its established scale. But his work paid off handsomely. In 2022, the shuttlecraft kit was re-released, complete with a full interior and 7 accurate figures. In absolute contrast to the 30 parts of the original AMT kit, this new release now consists of over 160 highly detailed parts, and no detail has been overlooked, including the landing lights. Parts are now included for the aft mechanical compartment, maintenance hatches on the aft of the shuttle and on the cabin floor, sidewall computers, and even a toilet in the aft chamber. Even better, many parts are molded in clear styrene, making it an ideal kit for lighting. Decals are likewise quite expansive, especially when compared to the original AMT releases. Markings are included for the Galileo, or Galileo 2 if you choose, as well as the Columbus and the Einstein. Everything I've seen suggests this kit builds up beautifully, and I can't wait to get one of my own. So there you have it. If it wasn't for AMT looking to secure the rights for a plastic model kit, the classic Star Trek episode The Galileo 7 might never have been produced. The concept of a fleet of shuttlecraft on the Enterprise may never have seen the light of day, and Star Trek may never have achieved the success that it did. Okay, that last part was a reach, but I think you see what I'm getting at. Regardless, the last 50 years have seen the release of 2 model kits on both ends of the accuracy spectrum. Right, so this is the audience participation part of the video. Did you ever build the original AMT shuttlecraft model, or even the newer Round 2 model? Tell me what your experiences were, I'd love to hear about it. Vent your thoughts in the comment section below the same way that Spock vented the fuel supply of the Galileo 7. You've been watching Scale Icons, and I'll see you soon at the workbench.